Hello, everybody. I am here with Matthew Nelson, and I'm going to ask him a few quick questions. Are you ready, Matthew?
Ready.
All right. What is your favorite food truck?
So my favorite food truck is the taco truck near the gas station on Mooney. I forget the name and I think it's changed, but it is a wonderful late night snack.
What's the main reason you chose teaching?
The main reason I chose teaching is I really, really love watching students find themselves, like really just build confidence in themselves, discover. By finding themselves, they also have to find their place in the world. So it's, finding the world, seeing other ideas, seeing the breadth and inspiring depth of their surroundings and discovering their position within that vastness. I think it's wonderful.
Very cool. What courses do you teach?
Yeah, so I teach mostly English 1, like many people in our department, but I also teach English 2 and English 4.
Very good.
English 2 is logic and rhetoric, by the way. English 4 is the introduction to literature course.
What's your proudest non-teaching accomplishment?
Yeah, I would say my proudest non-teaching accomplishment, there are a lot, but the first one that came to my head is it recently actually helped the Source LGBT Center put together a annual charity fundraising gala. The first one last year raised about $80,000 for charity. I'm the chairperson again for the upcoming one, and we have already raised $50,000, and we're looking probably to hit the $80,000 mark again this year. So
fantastic!
I'm proud of that because I think the Source does important work, and I'm really happy that I've been able to help put that event together for them.
What is something most people don't know about your past?
Something most people do not know about my past is that when I was so one thing that they don't know is when I was in high school, I scored better on math and science exams than I did on English exams. And I actually, my first year of college even, set the curve in a chemistry course that was seen as like the difficult kind of first year chemistry course that all of the biomed students were taking. And I set the curve on the midterm. So I was very proud of that, to have all of these kind of biomed students upset at me.
What's your watch it 1,000 times movie?
Star Wars, the classic trilogy, and also the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
What's your late work policy?
So my late work policy is, if students need more time, talk to me about it. Like, I actually have a kind of anonymous Google form they can fill out to get more time on assignments, because I also know it can be scary to talk to a professor. I let students kind of pick a new deadline, because I think if they can, figure out their time management and practice that and kind of holding themselves accountable, it helps build those skills. And I think it's been a really successful policy. Students often in my kind of like informal questionnaire at the end of the semester say that that's one of the things they appreciate the most, is that I give them kind of control over deadlines. I do set a maximum of up to 7 days after the initial deadline, because I don't want students to fall too far behind, because then that can overwhelm them. But at that point, I say, let's meet, let's talk about this and set kind of a plan to catch up.
What's your absence policy?
Yeah, so my absence policy, it's so weird because we have not had in-person classes for quite some time, I feel like. But my absence policy typically is, obviously, if you need to stay home, you're an adult, and I trust your reasoning, So, learning is valuable and important. So I think one of the key things I say is, let's go over what you missed. Let's chat about it, and let's figure out how to have you kind of catch up so you feel kind of included back in the class. I focus more on the affective kind of and like content issues of absence as opposed to the like it's often framed punitively, and I don't want to frame it as like you lose points or something like that because
Right.
they're adults. If they miss a day, they have a good reason.
What's one piece of advice for your students?
Yeah, I would say the piece of advice I can give my students is to really embrace the ability to explore in college. Take courses that you have no idea what they're about. One of the examples I give my classes actually is my freshman year of undergrad, I took a philosophy course. I had never studied philosophy or read philosophy. I fell in love with it and ended up being a double major in English and philosophy.
Oh.
Students in high school don't get exposed to philosophy, sociology, anthropology, all of these fascinating subjects. And I think if students go in thinking like, okay, what do I want to do in college? They never think I might want to major in anthropology because they've never heard of it.
Yeah.
And so I encourage them to explore and find passions that they don't have, as opposed to only kind of feeding passions they currently have, although that's valuable too.
You have pets?
Yeah, so I have a wonderful rescue puppy. I named her Coffee after the drink because that's my favorite thing in the world, probably, and so it seemed appropriate. But I also named her Coffee because I figured she will keep us up at night and she will wake us up in the morning.
That is perfect.
Then my partner has a cat named Squishy. So it's a very sweet kitty. I'm allergic, so I can't give her all the love that I think she deserves and wants, but she is a sweet kitty and very cuddly.
Oh. On Sunday, do you hike a mountain or kill zombies?
The only way I will ever hike a mountain is if I'm running from zombies. So I think, if there are zombies in the world, I think that is much more important than anything else. But yeah, that's sort of the answer.
What's your favorite recent teaching moment?
My favorite recent teaching moment is I had a former student reach out to me and saying he wanted advice on what colleges to apply to. As we were talking, part of the conversation I have is like, okay, what are you thinking about? What colleges do you know about? And he only really knew about local schools like, Cal State Fresno and Bakersfield. And I said, well, okay, so what's your GPA? And so he's like, well, my GPA is a 4.0. I have all of these kind of great academic achievements, and I know he's a strong student because he did a great job in my class. And so as we were talking, I was like, well, would you be open to going to, say, other schools like UCLA, UC Berkeley, like aim big, you have a perfect record right now and you're almost at COS. And he's like, oh, it would be a dream. I just don't think they would select me. And so we sat down and I looked at what Berkeley says they want from transfer applicants, what Harvard says they want from transfer applicants, from Yale and UCLA and all of these schools that he had heard of but didn't think you could get into. And he was just like overcome and was like, I'm going to apply to those schools and see if I get in. And so, I don't know if he will. Obviously, it's always hard. It's always a gamble. It's always rolling the dice. But I think just the fact that this student suddenly was able to, as I said, like see their place in a bigger world and recognize their ability to be in a bigger world, like that's really inspiring.
Where do you go for a long weekend?
Usually, if we can, we like to get away to LA. Raymond and I are obsessed with a place called the Magic Castle, which is a private members-only club for magicians. Raymond happens to be a non-magician member, and I am trying to become a magician member. So it's a ton of fun.
Do it now or wait until the last minute?
I like to do it gradually over time. So I like to break the project down, like a good time manager, break it down into smaller steps and do those smaller steps gradually over time, and then send it, on the deadline or a day before. Take time to review it. It's the writing process I teach my students. Write a page a day or so, save time to review it, and there you go.
What's another career you'd pursue?
I think partly, as I mentioned, I love planning kind of fundraiser events. I am planning one for the source. I think being an event planner would be a lot of fun. I like the idea of bringing people together.
What's your favorite anxiety reliever?
The cliche and kind of expected answer would be I love to read, but I also really love to play video games. I'm a big gamer. So mostly like role-playing games and strategy games and that kind of thing.
Kill zombies.
That's more action, first-person shooter, horror, I want things that have a nice deep plot, character development.
What is one inanimate object you'd take to a desert island?
So a boat. And I think that is the only correct answer for this.
What's your favorite thing about your job?
My favorite thing about my job, it goes into why I got into teaching. It's to help students kind of find their place in the world. But my favorite thing about my job is it's those kinds of like one-on-one student hour conversations with students. Mm-hmm. Even the tough ones, because I think, students, when they go in, they leave feeling better and more confident about themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's so important. So many students have all of the tools they need to learn. It's the self-doubt, it's figuring out the steps to learning, the sort of organization strategies and time management strategies and things. But they have everything they need. It's just sometimes being a cheerleader. Mm-hmm.
Is your office decor minimalist or maximalist?
The Dungeons and Dragons nerd wants to say chaotic good. I have not had the time to really fully decorate because of this whole pandemic. But I'm working towards something a little more put together.
What's the biggest obstacle you would remove for students if you could?
Self-doubt.
Yeah.
I think so many students, and this is tied to financial pressures. It's tied to, problems with not having opportunities to really fully develop like their potential. Students often start to think they're not capable, mm-hmm. And I think helping students realize they can do things and starting to then see the path on how to then do it when you can is really the key part, the key element to learning. And it's a joy to help them find that.
Yeah. What's the best thing about being a Costa member?
Yeah.
And officer?
Yeah. I really love meeting people on campus, like other, my colleagues. I think oftentimes we get so kind of isolated in our divisions that we don't interact with other people. Because of the work I'm doing in Costa, I've been able to meet people all over campus. As a pretty new faculty member still, that's been so helpful. It's, Costa has really helped me feel welcome at COS. And so part of what I think I like about being in Costa, especially in as the secretary, is I get to in turn help others feel welcome here too.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.